For a long time in the West, we've been thinking that we're just on this inexorable decline towards worldliness and sexual and disorder. And it could be that we are. Very rarely does social change happen in just a straight line. There's usually, 3 steps forward, 2 steps back, that sort of thing. But it's worth noting, Ryan Burge is really good. He's I want to say a Baptist. I know he's a minister. I shouldn't say what tribe he belongs to, but he's on Twitter. He's on Substack. He's really good at putting together information on social trends that we're seeing in the church, religious trends. He put out a thing a couple weeks ago, January 27th. There's been a backlash against same-sex marriage among a growing group of Christians. It's a coalition of young and old, infrequent and frequent attenders, but it's clearly there. So ever since a Burge fell decision was made by the Supreme Court in the United States, it's been just pretty much seen as inevitable that everything is going the gay direction. One day we're going to look around and just not even make distinctions between sexes, and all of this is just an amalgam of people having sex with each other on their own terms, and Christians seeming like backward, crazy, draconian bigots. And maybe it could still go that way. I mean, God alone is in charge of history. But it's also possible that we start going that direction and there's a backlash. And you will notice that in many ways, election of Donald Trump was a backlash against that, even though he is sexually very liberal, has not been against gay marriage, has not been necessarily even against, well, he has been, I think, much more willing to show skepticism about trans stuff. But you'll notice LGBTQ, it's all grouped together. I've heard people call them the rainbow people. I think that can be helpful in just saying there are gay people that are trying to separate themselves off now from the others and saying, hey, we're normal, they're not, they're the freaks, draw the line here. But I'm not sure that that's the way it's going to go, and it definitely shouldn't go that way. There have been gay people that write me and appreciate my tone and tenor, and say, please don't lump me in with these people over here. And I've said respectfully, I still do. I think there is a biblical sexual ethic that we all submit to, or we're in rebellion against it. And whether or not you're flagrantly walking around in a dog mask and doing sadomasochistic stuff, or you're dressing up as a woman and you're a man, like all of that is all equally repugnant to just two men being together, or two women being together, or even a man and a woman being together outside of marriage. All of these things are equally repugnant to God. We come up with our own notions of what is closer to normal or okay than others. But when you read your Bible, a distinctly biblical worldview is there's what's good and holy and tolerable, and then there's everything else, and it condemns you and damns you. So creating these gradations outside of what God is pleased with is just a human thing it's not helpful when you're trying to be a Christian. It doesn't lead anyone closer to the kingdom. Let's look at some of the article, and then we'll close with a prayer here in a minute. Public opinion is a weird thing. On some topics, it's incredibly stable over time. That was the case for abortion for decades. I remember leading a discussion about that in graduate school when I was a teaching assistant. If you trace long-term survey trends about the topic, the public's views in the early 2000s didn't differ that much from answers to those same questions 30 years earlier. But there are other issues where viewpoints shifted incredibly rapidly. Support for same-sex marriage is clearly one of these topics. The General Social Survey asked about this for the first time in 1988. A lot of people don't know we have surveys about everything. I had a lady coming at me about a Facebook post I made earlier this week saying, show me the data on this, show me the data on this, as though it didn't exist. And I was easily able to find some stuff and give it to her. We've been collecting social data on all kinds of stuff for decades, if not centuries. The share of the sample agreeing that gay couples should have the right to marry was 11.7%. Then they stopped asking the question for a long time. Then they added it back to the core of the survey in 2004. I'm guessing this was because the topic was center stage in the election between George W. Bush and John Kerry. 13 states had a constitutional amendment on the ballot to codify marriage being between one man and one woman. It passed in all 13. I should urge you to go and subscribe to Ryan Burge's Substack. It's graphsaboutreligion.com. So anyway, he says approval for same-sex marriage has stopped increasing. So you're going to see, here's the main chart. and it shows support for gay marriage went up until about 2015, leveled off, and then is now coming down. So I don't know that anybody has given an explanation for this. I think most of it's just been digesting that this is what's happening. He says one of the most interesting trends in public opinion research over the last 20 years is the issue of same-sex marriage. We're not going to read this whole article. I think I'm just going to read another paragraph or two. In the 2004 General Social Survey, 31% of people believed gay couples should have the right to marry. 2 years later, it was 35%. Then it jumped 4 more points by 2008. Just think about this. When Barack Obama was elected president in 2008, 39% of the country favored same-sex marriage. When he faced Mitt Romney for re-election in 2012, support for same-sex marriage was 49%. When he left office in 2016, it was 59%. A 20-point increase during the Obama administration. That's probably why Obama changed his public stance on the issue in the spring of 2012. The political winds had shifted. And this is something we need to appreciate about human culture. And it feels like the world is a solid, stable thing that we are. Sometimes it feels that way, but other times we realize things have radically changed in a short period of time, and things are moving faster than they ever have before. And there's a sort of insecurity and paranoia that takes over when you see that. And for a lot of people, and even for people in the church, the issue becomes, how can we adapt ourselves to fit the world as it is? And it results in this great insecurity and kind of like schizophrenia. And you have to eventually get to a point, I think everybody has to get there, where we say, oh, the world is lost, and we need to stop changing alongside the world. It creates misery. It creates I just had a new thought. If you study dating patterns, this is really smart. You should pay attention. This is worthy. Maybe not. I don't know. I think it is. If you study dating trends in America right now, one of the things that's happening as feminism and cheap sex and the devaluation of sex has taken place is hypergamy. And this is the natural state for pagan cultures around the world. But what's happening is there's a small number of elite men that are accumulating to themselves massive amounts of women. And then there are there's a much larger amount of men who are not high quality, that are not getting any women at all. And this is a recipe for social unrest. These are incels. That's the word we have for them. But this is what's happening in the church world as well, is there are a few elite churches that are able to navigate the shifting memes of Western culture and capitalize on that. And they get all these people, they create these mega churches that last a couple decades, and then they fall out of favor, and some other mega church takes over. But there's a kind of religious hypergamy that's taking over, where there are a lot of churches that are just incel churches. They are no longer found attractive among the people that they're desiring to save, and these people are being drawn increasingly towards these high quality males that like Andrew Tate or whoever you want to have stand in for this, are exciting and they're attractive, but they also lead to death and damnation. No, I chased that out too far. I'm not saying that all mega churches lead to death and damnation, but I am saying this trend towards hypergamy is a recipe for misery, that the church as it always existed was not participating in some kind of marketplace of ideas necessarily, where you had winners and losers and everybody coming to the winners. Rather, it was more evenly distributed, and people understood that it was not about riding the waves of different popular movements and fashions, but it was tapping into the eternal. We keep in the West imagining that we can redesign human nature, and we in the church have fallen for that lie, that humans are changing, that there are fundamental things about humanity that are changing, and so the gospel needs to change. And that neuters the gospel. And so I think part of what we're seeing, and if you want to read the rest of this article, I would advise you to. I think he does venture guesses as to why it is that things have leveled off. He looks at different groups. I think this is to our benefit to look at what groups are changing and which ones aren't. Man, I just love that he does this stuff. He's really good at it. But the thing I wanted to lift up is the world tries to get us spun up and distracted and looking at one thing then another, so we never go very deep. But I think what has happened as we've looked at different people in the throes of trans ideology or alternative sexual cultures. I'm thinking of the guy that was in charge of like nuclear stuff, who was into BDSM stuff and got caught stealing people's luggage from the airport. We've had these different public figures rise up, and we try and make them look normal and like they can get along in society, but then it just goes this gross direction. It's not that straight people never get gross, they do. Sin is gross, it impacts all people. But I think as we look at these alternative lifestyles, we're just going, this isn't normal. And as we make room for this, it's destroying any kind of solid structure that we have, especially for like children in our society. It's there have always been predators, but now to have a child, you're just so aware of so many predators that as you walk around the world with your children, you're just seeing nothing but predators. It's an anxious time to be raising children, and there are a lot of people who are just saying, not worth it. It's not worth it. We need to go back. We need to have a somewhat stable society with social norms that you just can't be this way. We're just not going to have you be this way around children. So there are a lot of people who aren't on board with that. They have these drag queen story hours, and then there are people like us who are just saying, no, I'm sorry, it is not my children's job to make room for you. We need our children to be living in a stable environment. And if that means that you are not able to be flying your freak flag out in public the way you want, okay, that's good. We all, for the children, have to say no to some things. You know, if it's not good enough, like you fear the Lord and you don't want to upset him, then at least have consideration for the children. But we can't have a society where everybody just does whatever they feel, and it's not tenable. So I can't help but look at some of these graphs and get a little hopeful that some sanity is being restored, and we're realizing that society is not about everybody doing whatever they want, but actually having a shared set of values and goals and ways that we're going to seek those things together.